Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Al, and the class of mage just keeps making a comeback on this channel week after week after week. Them Death Knights, Warlocks, and now Hunters are some of the more popular and some of the most regularly updated and tuned classes so far in the War Within beta. And this week is no different, as Arcane is continuing to be more refined going forward as it adapts a little bit for both of the hero specs of the Spellslinger and the Sun Fury, plus also sprinkled in a couple more Arcane changes. Obviously, the Spec of Fire is seeing more nerfs as expected, but I don't think that these are going to be enough to hold them back. But also, Frost has actually gotten some new stuff, like a brand new tier set and even a couple of new additions to their talents. So I want to take a look at everything in today's video, take a look at the hero specs, Arcane primarily, with a bit of Fire and Frost on the side. If you guys enjoy these regular class updates on the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So to begin this, I'm going to first start off with the hero talents, starting off with the Spellslinger, and then eventually we'll move on into some of the spec specific talents, though expect for majority of this week's update to be focused on the spec of Arcane. Starting out with the Spellslinger, we see a couple of adjustments for the main orb gameplay hook of Spellfrost teachings. This one's primarily been adjusted for Arcane, but then there's also other adjustments as well, like splintering orbs now allows for Arcane mages specifically. Enemies hit by Arcane orb will now conjure 4 Arcane splinters, which gives you an opportunity to deal 1 additional damage, but also to enable Splinter Storm a little bit more actively, so you get a little bit more value from this ability regularly. As for the Spellfrost teachings, the way that this mechanic works right now for Arcane is a little bit weird, or at least that's how it was last week's build. You see, this ability initially allowed you to regain a charge of Arcane Orb every time your Arcane Splinters did damage. But for Arcane mages, you already have kind of like a very short CD on your orbs, and you got to the point where essentially you were getting so many orb resets that got to the point where you were constantly chucking out orbs and you could never spend them fast enough, where you would essentially be sometimes sitting on 2 charges as you have other abilities such as Barrage, for example, that have gotten the tier set proc. So now they adjusted this ability to be a little bit more automatic on its own, while still allowing you to generate Arcane Orb charges as you did previously, which does offer you a little bit more of this, and I think you saw it just now, a little bit more of a reactionary type of gameplay. So the way that this ability works right now is your Arcane Splinters have a chance to launch an Arcane Orb automatically, and also increase all damage dealt by Arcane Orb by 20%. So now, as you play Arcane, you will just automatically start chucking out orbs in AoE content, but also in single target content. So in single target, this actually provides you with additional resources and damage, as well as splinters. But for AoE, this means that you'll have to be a little bit more reserved and careful with you playing around the Arcane Barrage, trying to make sure you're not over-generating too many Arcane charges, because right now abilities can now randomly fire off an orb, and you can get to a situation where you already have an opportunity for Arcane Barrage to fire an orb automatically with Orb Barrage, but now you can get an Orb Barrage essentially without getting an Orb Barrage, just as a Spellfrost teachings talent. So you can go from cycles of just Barrage, get full resources, another Barrage, get even more resources, and keep chaining like this for like a good bit if you get lucky enough. I think it's a fun playstyle. I think it breaks up the rotation of Arcane. It makes it a little bit more sporadic in AoE and does a ton of damage and conjures a ton of barrages. So investing heavily into barrage, I think, is going to be the play going forward. But it does, I think, smooth out Arcane rotation, at least in single target. And it's an interesting change that will make you want to pay attention to some of those procs. Besides this, Sun Fury has also got updates specifically again for Arcane mages, just to make both of these hero specs a little bit better for the spec. The few talents that did get adjusted were, one of them was the Codex of the Sunstriders, which now reads, over the duration, Arcane Phoenix will now consume Spellfire Spheres to cast an exceptional spell. Actually, I stand corrected. This change to this talent specifically does work for both Fire and Arcane. As your Phoenix spends those Arcane Spheres, they'll actually grant you the buff of Lingering Embers, which increases spell damage by 2% by up to 5 maximum stacks. So whenever you summon your Phoenix, the Phoenix actually also not only does a ton of damage on their own, but it will then eat up the spheres to empower the mage, making sure that your burst is just as valuable and viable as the Phoenix's burst during both of your prime burst combos. For Arcane specifically, we did see a couple of adjustments where we have talents such as Glorious Incandescence, where consuming Burden of Power would cause your next barrage to grant 4 arcane charges immediately and call down a storm of 4 meteorites to the target. With the talent of Mana Cascade, casting Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage now grants you 1% haste, stacks up to 10 times, and multiple instances may overlap. And the basic mechanic of generating spell fire spheres is now generated by using Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrages, which naturally plays more into the Arcane rotation, whether you're playing from a single target perspective or a more AoE cleave perspective. Besides this, the spec of Arcane Mage has also been adjusted by quite a bit, where we see positional adjustments for a handful of talents here and there. Though for the most part, the structure remains mostly. They did, however, adjust a couple of talents such as Nether Munitions, which is now on the same row as Magi's Spark. So you have more of a different playstyle, one that's a little more bursty, and the other that's a bit more delayed. With Nether Munitions now reading, when you touch the Magi detonates, it increases the damage of all affected targets from you by 8% for 12 seconds, which allows you a bigger burst window that follows after a touch of the Magi. Though if you want something a little bit more instant, Magi Spark has also been adjusted to be just as competitive, or hopefully as competitive. Your Magi Spark explosion damage has been buffed by 300%, and the Magi Spark echo damage buffed by 100%. Which will hopefully give you either a bit of a delayed damage buff window or potentially just a more burstier version of Magi's Touch. Besides this, Arcane Mages saw basic damage increases such as Arcane Blast buffed by 10%, Barrage buffed by 12%, and even Missiles empowered by 10%, as well as a slightly increased chance for Lay Drinker, which has now a 15% chance to proc rather than a 10% chance. Although the tooltip here suggests it's a 20% chance, so they might even increase it further. But they did mention that there's going to be doing more hotfixes for Arcane specifically, so maybe they'll have some kind of notes where that reads that Lay Drinker has been increased further. Lay Drinker echoes have also been buffed by 50% of all damage done, but the tooltip suggests that it's actually 60% in effectiveness, so it looks like they're still tuning Lay Drinker to be a little bit more competitive. And I messed around with the talent. I think it's an awesome addition, primarily in single target, where if you're focusing on single target fully, having that damage cleave onto nearby targets is pretty good. Although you would think this ability would be amazing when it comes to AoE damage, since it works for both Arcane Blast and Barrages, but the Barrage echoes in AoE are not as effective as I thought it might be. I mean, Barrage and everything else is still going to do quite a bit of damage, but for Lay Drinker, which is supposed to cause your Barrages to echo, I mean, with Barrages setting for what, 1.9 crit? 1.9 million, almost 2 million maximum crit, the most damage I've been able to do is a measly 1.8% of my overall damage, with the maximum being about 500,000. Which isn't bad numbers, I just wish those numbers happen more regularly, and it may just come down to the proc rate of the ability. Like, I think it has really good bones, it's just, the proc rate just doesn't seem quite right. Besides this, it also adjusted Arcane Mage, so abilities such as Missiles, Barrage, Supernova, and Shifting Power can now all generate clear casting, which makes getting missiles a lot more consistent, and this feels actually noticeable within dungeons. Just playing around and throwing out orbs and barrages, I felt like I was getting missile procs a lot more, so if you pair missiles together with something like Aether Attunement, as well as maybe with talents such as Arcane Delimitation, you actually really do feel that combo, and it feels pretty good to have Missiles Cleave and be very, very powerful in a 5-man target situation. Besides this, the Arcane Mage tier set have also been adjusted as well. You have the two set that reads, Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage damage is increased by 6%. This ability now adds Barrage instead of Explosion for better cleave in AoE and single target value. The 4-piece, however, bonus proc chance for this one has been reduced to 5%, as a 5% chance to make a next Arcane Barrage deal 20% increased damage and generate 4 arcane charges, though I feel like it procs quite a bit, but the damage has been buffed to 20%, so less uses out of it, but bigger reward overall. Afterwards, we have the Spec of Fire, which has gotten a couple adjustments, but mostly unsurprisingly nerfs. It looks like fire mages have been found to be quite popular with a lot of players on the beta, so Blizzard has took note of it and they're trying their very best to gas out the flames, but I don't think it's gonna do much. Starting off, things like Living Bomb are being reduced by 30%, which is still very, very strong when it comes to testing. And the talent of Sparking Cinder's bonus is being reduced to 10%, down from 15, though as you can see right now, the tooltip doesn't reflect it. Spark and Cinder's proc can only happen 3 times a minute also, which does give you a little bit more limitation on how often this ability can take effect. The ability Phoenix Flames has also been reduced by 10% on top of it, as well as the damage of intensifying flames. Though I don't think this will be enough to take out fire out of the running whatsoever. The Spec is still blowing a lot of the different playstyles out of the water completely, and it's still a very powerful ranged option even after all these recent adjustments. And you thought that we might actually go this video talking about Arcane and Fire without covering Frost, but Frost actually got some updates. This is the Spec that's gotten the least amount of changes throughout all the periods so far over on the beta, but it looks like they are at least listening to the feedback for Frost mages and are trying to give them some actual viable new options to play with. For starters, we got a brand new talent called Permafrost Lances, which is a fun one where Frozen Orb now increases Ice Lance's damage by 15% for 15 seconds, and there's quite a bit of interaction to it. Essentially, if you can get a bunch of frozen orbs out, you can maintain this 50% damage buff for Ice Lands almost indefinitely. This is pretty easy to do as you utilize your blizzards in order to give you cooldown reduction on your things such as Frozen Orb. Primarily with talents such as Ice Color, that cooldown reduction can benefit that Frozen Orb uptime, and Frozen Orb generates you plenty of procs to really juice up all of those Ice Lances. But also there's a Spell Slinger, which works for Arcane but also works for Frost, where Frost Splinters have a 2% chance, and you do get a lot of Splinters pretty regularly, have a chance to reset the cooldown of Frozen Orb, letting you use it instantly, so that could potentially give you more of this kind of like a cleavy, Ice Lancy focused build, which I think would benefit Frost super well. Though the talent of Snowstorm has been removed as Ice Color moved down, and now we have Permafrost up here, Snowstorm previously was a talent that allowed Blizzard a 30% chance to increase the damage of your next cone of cold with a stacking element. A talent that kinda got some use, but I think the option of Permafrost Lance is actually just a much better version. Just like Arcane, they also adjusted the tier set for Frost Mages also. Now the 2 set reads, Ice Lance damage is being buffed by 8%. The 4 piece has also been adjusted. Damage from Fingers of Frost enhanced Lances invokes Frigid Pulse, dealing frost damage to nearby enemies with a soft cap of 8 targets. This allows you to really focus in on the Lances, which is just a bread and butter of the Frost type of playstyle, and allows you to really full in commit on that cleave Ice Lands gameplay, which I think can benefit Frostfire Mage or the Spellslinger Mage. Though they did mention that a lot of mages apparently liked the original Frost Mage tier set, but they felt that that tier set at the time benefited Spellslinger a little bit too heavily, though they did want to add it back as a talent for Frost Mages after reworking it a little bit. So it's good to see that they're actually reading a lot of the feedback from the community and are making changes, because I think Frost Mage out of all 3 specs has a lot of room where they could see adjustments. Just the question is, which direction could they go into? And that's an opportunity for a lot of Frost Mages to, when they see a tier set, when they see a playstyle, let them know that you really like it, and they can maybe find a way to incorporate it into the Frost gameplay. As from actual testing out the mages as Fire and Frost, after all of these changes, I noticed that neither of the specs are in a bad spot overall. Kinda surprised that Arcane saw as many buffs as it did, but maybe within raid testing, it wasn't doing nearly as competitively. Though I always felt like its damage had a lot of potential when it comes to AoE situations in Mythic Plus, with things such as Spellslinger, providing you as many orbs as it does. Though I feel this Spellslinger adjustment that it becomes a bit more passive, which I think what they didn't want to give Spellslinger, but it still has a gameplay hook. The extra Arcane Orbs does make you want to position yourself where if there's a chance for an Arcane Orb to fly, you always want to position it where it's always going to hit a target, because that can generate you additional resources, which I think could maybe make it annoying in certain situations. But the additional resources could also possibly just kind of eat up other procs and maybe over-generate resources. But for the most part, I did like random Arcane Orbs flying out left and right, especially in AoE, because the amount of barrages you could spam out back to back is so fun, and it feels like you can keep that chain going for a while, which I love, that like unmitigated power of the Arcane and the unpredictability of it. But I always had a very specific taste when it comes to certain classes. As for Fire, the spec feels really good. The Living Bomb nerfs, Spark Cinder changes, Phoenix Flame adjustments, Pyroblast damage nerfs, Intensify and Flame adjustments, all of those you don't really feel. I feel like Fire Mage just came out of the gate really strong so far throughout the beta, and I've really tried to hammer out a solid playstyle for them with their talents. And now it's time for a little bit of tuning to see where they are going to be compared to other classes. But either way, I don't think they're going to be in a bad spot overall. I'm still excited as to what Fire Mage can bring going forward. And I want to pass it off to you guys in the comments down below. What do you think about all of these recent adjustments? What are your thoughts on the pretty big changes and buffs coming to the spec of the Arcane? And also, what are your thoughts on the Arcane Spellslinger adjustments? Making it more passive, would you like it to have a little bit more interactivity like it had before, or are you fine with random procs of Arcane Orbs flying left and right? As for Fire Mages, how far low do you think the spec is going to go? Or do you think none of these nerfs are even going to touch it and it's still going to most likely be a dominant King spec when it comes to range playstyles going forward, at least for the first season of M+? Or do you think these are enough to bring Fire Mage down to just about where every other class is? Or maybe do you think they need more nerfs in order to get them a little bit lower than everybody else? Also, let me know what are your thoughts about the Frost Mage adjustments, and if you would like to see any other specific old tier sets, old talents the Frost Mages used to have back in the day brought back in for this expansion, since they are listening to feedback. I wonder what other changes Frost could get before the release of this expansion. Let me know those thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.